Hello, my name is Dr Lydia Kearney and I'm a lecturer in cognitive psychology at the University of Kent. In this course, I'm going to be outlining the nature versus nurture debate in psychology. We'll first consider what the debate is, what the two terms mean, how they can be measured, and why they are important to our understanding of psychology in the modern age. Next, we'll look at what we mean by nature. So we'll explore how this is tested, along with some of the strengths and limitations of these research methods. We'll then take a look at nurture as an approach and explain what we mean by it and again how it can be tested, and we'll also look at some key studies in each of those that have helped us to understand the origins of human behaviour. Finally, we'll look at some of the ways in which our genes and our environment can interact to change the way that we behave and how our traits are expressed. This combined approach takes into consideration the ways that nature and nurture interact to express a particular trait, a behaviour, or a personality style. By doing this, we can come up with a much more comprehensive explanation than just looking at nature or just looking at nurture on its own. So what do we mean by nature versus nurture? Broadly speaking, nature explanations are ones which are internal to a person, and nurture explanations are ones which are external. So for example, a nature-based psychologist who favours those internal explanations are sometimes called nativists. And if they were asked to explain why somebody is, let's say, aggressive, they might look to see whether aggression is common in other family members and see whether there is a genetic basis for that behaviour. Psychologists who favour nurture-based explanations, sometimes called nurturists, to answer the same question might look at whether the person who is aggressive has aggressive role models in their lives, whether they have friends who display aggressive behaviour, perhaps whether they play aggressive video games, to see whether the impact of the environment the person is in changes the ways in which they respond to the world around them. In reality, as we'll see throughout this course, most behaviours are much too complicated to be explained by just nature or just nurture alone. So that's why we'll move on to look at gene-environment interactions a little bit later on. So quite often people will say, if there is no correct answer, if we can't say it's nature or it's nurture, what is the point of this debate? Why does it still matter? If most of the time the answer is going to be, it's a little bit of both. Okay. Now the reason that this debate is still important, even if we'll never reach a definitive answer, is that it changes the ways that we think about the world. So if we take the example of aggression, sometimes in the form of antisocial behaviour or criminal behaviour, if you favour a nativist, a nature-based, an internal explanation for why people are aggressive, you might decide that there is no way to get rid of aggression in society. There will always be some because it is hardwired into some people's genetics to behave aggressively. So that means people who favour that perspective might favour sort of harsh punishments for antisocial and criminal behaviour. Whereas if you favour a nurture-based explanation, you're more likely to focus on a person's environment. So maybe you might look to engage with communities where there are high levels of aggression and violence and see what can be changed about the environment that people find themselves in to prevent them from behaving aggressively. Elsewhere, we can also look at mental health as part of the nature-nurture debate. We know that people are more likely to develop depression if they have one or more close family members who also suffer from it. So that gives us an idea that maybe nature plays an important role in the development of mental illness. However, we also know that there are certain environmental factors that can increase a person's likelihood of developing depression. So for example, we know that people are quite likely to experience depression following major negative life events like a bereavement or a loss of a job or major changes to your financial and personal circumstances. They seem to put people at risk for developing depression. So that seems to give some strength to the idea that there is an element of nurture involved in the development of depression. So again, If you imagine yourself as someone who is a nativist or a nurturist focused psychologist, that might change what you recommend as a form of treatment. So if you think that depression arises from internal causes, so it's genetically encoded, and it means that we have a kind of an internal tendency to experience depression based on things like our neurotransmitters and our neurochemistry, that means that you might favour drug-based, medication-based approaches to the treatment of depression. Alternatively, if you favour a nurturist-based approach, you might favour more sort of talking therapy-based approaches where a person tries to achieve a better understanding of their circumstances, how they've reacted to those circumstances, and why that has caused them to experience depression. Later in this lecture, I'll often use examples from mental health to discuss the impact of nature and nurture on our behaviour. That's really just because that's my specialism, but you can apply this debate to almost any examples of human behaviour. As you go through this course and you listen to the individual lectures, try to think of some examples of your own behaviours, your personality traits, things that you enjoy to do, things that you don't enjoy to do, and try to work out whether you think they might be on the basis of your nature, your internal characteristics, or on the basis of your nurture, the environment you have received. In the next lecture on this course, we're going to look at nature as an explanation in a bit more detail. We'll be focusing on genetics. So that's where we're going to look next. We'll consider how we can measure the impact of genetics and what it can tell us about how human behaviour develops.